Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. On behalf of the ESIP board and staff, I am so excited to welcome you all to the ESIP summer meeting. I am Susan Shingledecker, ESIP's executive director, and I would like to open our meeting with a land acknowledgement. I want to honor those Indigenous people, Native Americans and others, who have stewarded our planet, the land and the water, long before our arrival. In many cases, they were removed from their land by the forces of colonization and white supremacy. The ESIP team works in Maryland, New York, Montana, and Vermont. So I want to especially acknowledge the Nanticoke, Piscataway, Susquehannock, Munsee Lenape, Cheyenne, Salish Kootenai, Absolute, Abenaki, and Wabanaki people and nations who have stewarded these lands long before us, are here with us today, and will be with us into the future. Additionally, I want to challenge all of us in this community to work for justice and to use our minds and voices to include others, especially those from historically marginalized groups. To enable and empower this work, ESIP as a community has established community participation guidelines that spell out expected and unacceptable behaviors and how to address and report behavior that falls outside of these guidelines. In the last year, I have found the ESIP community to be incredibly welcoming and friendly. Our team has worked hard to create as many networking sessions and opportunities for small group discussion this week. But it is important to recognize that with a community of this size, with incredible passion for our work, disagreements and misunderstandings can happen. I encourage you to use the community participation guidelines to understand expectations and bring any concerns you have to a member of ESIP leadership, staff, or board, or use the reporting mechanisms outlined in the guidelines. I am so honored that over 430 of you have dedicated time this week to be here with us. I ask that you do what you can to be fully present. Block your calendar, put on your out of office email, barricade your office door. Yeah, I actually have done that. Maybe you don't have to go quite that far. The magic of ESIP is in its people, and I want to make sure that you can be as present as possible. Our team has worked to make the sessions as participatory as possible. I am especially excited for the over a quarter of you who this is your first ESIP meeting. And I ask our experienced community members to go out of their way to welcome our first-time attendees. It is going to be a great week focused on leading innovation in earth science data frontiers. I want to thank our federal sponsors, NASA, NOAA, and USGS, who without their support, none of this would be possible. I also want to thank our gold levels meeting sponsors, Esri and Microsoft, and longtime sponsor Element 84. These firms bring more than just financial support, but are generous with their time and their technology and their leadership. Throughout the week, you can find ESIP staff in the help desk in Kiko chat, on Slack, or at staff@esipfed.org. Please reach out if you have any questions. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ken Casey, ESIP's president and board chair.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there, no matter where you are, and welcome to the 2021 July ESIP meeting. I'm really excited. I can barely even put it into words how excited I am about the lineup that we've got in store for you guys this week. And I really want to start by saying thanks to Susan and the whole ESIP team, Patty Allen on the ESIP Ops, we've got Megan Carter on our community director, and of course Annie Burgess, our lab director, and they've really gone out of their way to set up an incredible meeting this week with just unbelievable opportunities to engage one-on-one in small groups. I really think you're going to see a virtual meeting here that reflects our old in-person meetings in a lot of ways. And so, you know, you can call me out if I'm wrong about that at the end of the week, but I am excited. I think you're going to see a level of engagement in virtual meetings that we haven't seen before, and really thanks to the team for doing that. Like Susan said, I really want everybody to do what they can to go all in this week, and whatever that all in means for you. You know, start by telling your bosses to leave you alone. You can tell them the ESIP president said so, and let you really focus on this week's agenda and all of these opportunities to interact. So go all in. Don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions, right? I don't, nobody in our community, which is, really strives to be a safe and open and inclusive one, is going to criticize you if you can't give the authoritative treatise on the semantic web, or if you can't go into the details on convolutional neural networks, or you can't give the 1-minute elevator speech on ontologies, right? This community doesn't care. So ask those questions. Don't be afraid. Really go all in. You introverts out there, ramble on a little bit longer than you're comfortable with. And the extroverts out there, be a little bit quieter and maybe listen a little bit more than you're comfortable with. Make a plan this week, but don't be afraid to change it at a moment's notice and chase down whatever looks interesting to you at the moment. I think that's how you're really going to get the most out of this week ahead, is by sort of going where your interests are. If whatever catches your eye, whether it's that thing you've been working your whole career on, or the shiny new object that just catches your attention, go, grab that thing and dive on in and just go all in. I do want to also give a quick shout out to the ESIP board, to Denise and Tracy and Bill and Mike and Sarah and Leslie, Nancy and Cindy, who've just really been working hard behind the scenes. They make my job as the ESIP president as easy as can be, and have all contributed, I think, to setting up what's going to be a fantastic week ahead. So with that said, I really am excited to hand it off to the folks who are going to lead us through this incredibly innovative session. We've got Sarah Lubkin from NASA's Earth Science Data Systems, Leslie Hsu from the USGS Community for Data Integration, and Annie Burgess from our ESIP lab director. And so let me hand it over to you, Sarah. Take it away.
Thanks, Ken. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to Innovate at ESIP. ESIP's theme this summer is leading innovation in earth science data frontiers. Leslie, Annie, and I work with seed funding programs, Community for Data Integration at USGS, ESIP Lab at ESIP, and then the Access Program at NASA to support the development of innovative tools, services, data, and other technology for the earth science community. And we see many wonderful projects, but these great ideas don't always make it to the users that need them. So this session provides an opportunity for some of our PIs to talk about their work and how their big ideas can work for you. So we wanted our innovators to explain their science in a way that's understood by a broad audience. So our session is partly modeled after Ignite at AGU. Each speaker has 5 minutes and 20 slides to talk about their project. But we also wanted to provide our speakers with advice that they can use as they continue to evolve their projects. So we invited a panel of experts to provide feedback after each presentation. So I'd like to quickly introduce our expert panel. We have Tracy Pallone, the president and co-founder of Element 84, Katie Baines, the Earth Science Data Systems Deputy Program Manager at NASA, and Dana Ostringa, Assistant Chief Data Officer at NOAA. We also gave our speakers the opportunity to get feedback from you, our audience, and their potential end users. Each speaker provided us with a poll question that will be posted on chat, and you just click on the link to answer. You can also use chat to post comments, and of course, you could follow up with the speaker after the session as well. So we're on a time limit, so I'll interrupt when it's time to move on to the next speaker. And we also ask that those of you who are not speaking, keep your mics and cameras off to not take away from the speakers. So let's get started. Our first speaker is Kelsey Breseman. And Kelsey is the data program lead at the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. Her talk title is Environmental Data Justice Through Participatory Data Science. And Kelsey, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I want you to take a moment. Maybe close your eyes. Think of a place in the world that is special to you. Maybe it's a place where you swim or wade or where you caught frogs as a kid. Maybe it's a place where your family lives and plays. Maybe it's just somewhere you walk or where you go outside to get a breath of fresh air. The important thing is, this is a place that you know, a place that you notice and feel connected to. But what if the water changes color? Who do you ask? How do you find out if that's okay? Federal data shows that facilities violate their Clean Air and Clean Water Act permits all the time, and that enforcement of those permits is very low. The permitting system we have isn't working the way it's supposed to, but I think we can do better by bringing the people who love the places more directly into the governance process. In our project in the Environmental Enforcement Watch, which is a project of EGI, we've been talking to environmental justice groups. This is a water protector group in Alaska, and they want to keep their waterways pristine. And they asked, which companies should we talk to about improving their effluent emissions? How can we reach out better? This is the Boston chapter of the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth climate activist group. They wanted to know if their legislative district enforces environmental rules well. They often act through sit-ins at offices. In Chelsea, Massachusetts, permits for local oil storage facilities were up for review this year. The community there wanted to know, will these new permits protect our community? When it comes to a public comment period, what points should we bring up? What do we need to know? And the way we help to answer these questions is through Jupyter Notebooks. We spent the last year and a half working in collaboration with these communities and others to develop data science tools that they can use to answer their own questions. We scraped the EPA's Environmental Compliance and History Online database, stitching together the CSVs that are not exposed through their own user interface, and we mirror it through a partnership with Stony Brook University. We build Jupyter Notebooks with instructions that are designed for people who've never run code before. We've had a lot of success with first-timers feeling comfortable trying this. I've been pretty impressed. With our ESIP lab grant, we're working to get this information even more accessible by building an interactive web portal. And then when we bring this tool back to the communities, we usually do it live. We walk them through things together and we listen. What are people surprised to learn? What can we learn from them? And what questions are not answered by the data and the data tools that we have? So far, this is what we've come up with. Through the collaborations, we've developed notebooks that examine the enforcement of permits issued under the Clean Air, Clean Water, and Resource Conservation Recovery Acts that correspond to meaningful geographies. Reporting by geography accomplishes two major goals. First, it makes the data personal. If you remember the place you thought of in the beginning, what is the area that impacts that place? So if it's a lake that you like to swim in, what is the boundary of the watershed? What area do you need to care about? This brings us back to the second point. EPA uses the data to check whether facilities are following their permits, but our approach actually flips this around. Instead of focusing on the facilities, we want to focus on the places. It's not about what one or another facility does, but how air, water, land, and people are impacted in aggregate. Here's the big idea. Environmental governance should be accountable to the people who stand to be most impacted. Who notices if the water changes color? Who coughs if the air is dirty? What communities historically get sick more often than others? We want a participatory environmental governance that takes into account data collected by the community, citizen science efforts, accounts of lived experience. Imagine if there was an EPA office in every neighborhood where you could ask questions and talk about changes you'd noticed. What if communities shape the regulation from the beginning? Right now, we protest or we catalog critique to give in public comment in about a minute or so of official call. What if communities gave input before the rules were proposed? We hope this project can help people advocate for permit limits that are based on aggregate impacts that incorporate precaution around health impacts. We want people to use this information to fight for environmental justice policy that is enforceable and meaningful to the people and the places that it is meant to protect. It starts with information. Our first step is to help communities self-advocate by helping them find and use this data. With funding from ESIP, we're designing a web portal based on the needs of environmental justice groups so they can access our tools. And in Friday's session, you can come help us. This project's been a collaborative effort across environmental justice groups, volunteers, part-time staff, students, professors, and even a range of funding organizations from Packard to Doris Duke to ESIP Lab. So if you want to be involved in some way but can't come to Friday's session, please reach out. Thanks.
All right. So should we just go ahead and ask the questions then? Yeah,
Or,
Katie. So it's time for our panel to provide questions and feedback. And so I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you, Katie. Go ahead.
Cool. Hey, Kelsey, I really enjoyed your presentation. I was really interested to hear some of your thoughts on if are you only using EPA data? And if so, like, do you see an opportunity to use other organizational data? As a representative of NASA, I always ask about that. And what do you see the hurdles for utilization of different data sources and bringing them together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that our fundamental hurdle is capacity. You're all probably very familiar with that issue. Right now, we only use specific EPA federal data sets because that's all we really have the space to process at the moment in terms of the people involved in the project. But there are a lot of issues, even if we were to try to do more. It's not just adding more data and analyzing it. So even if we wanted to look at state-based EPA, there's a lot of issues in uniformity of information. It's not really, there's not the same information collected, but it's also not collected in the same way with the same columns. And this probably surprises nobody here, but we would love to concatenate more information, but it is much harder to add any new information because it's not all aligned well.
And one more quick question. Are you just focusing on the United States and I guess outlying provinces, or is this a global thing right now? I guess EPA would be focusing on.
Yeah, it has to be US at the moment just because the data sets we're using, but we would love to expand it a bit more. And we've just been talking recently internally about looking more at how Canada does legislation versus how the US does and seeing what we can learn from successes and failures on both sides.
Cool, thanks. I probably used my 2 minutes, Sandy, so.
I'll defer to Leslie. Leslie, do we have any time for any of our other panelists to pipe up, or should we go to our next speaker?
We do have time for a quick question, but it is not mandatory.
Dana or Tracy, any comment or feedback up for Kelsey?
I just was wondering if you've been looking at sort of localities or if you've looked at like CONUS altogether. I know there were a lot of pictures from Boston.
Oh yeah, so well, we have a number of people who are in Boston, so we're biased a little there. I'm in Seattle, so I want to get more here, but we're really just talking to whatever groups respond when we reach out, and we're asking environmental justice groups from underrepresented communities first, typically.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Oh, and just a plug for the question in the chat. Don't forget that.
Hey, thank you, panelists. Sarah, do you want to take it away?
Yes. So thanks, Kelsey. What a great start to our session. Our next speaker is Joe Hamman. Joe is a project scientist at NCAR and the technology director at Carbon Plan. His talk title is PangeoML, Open Science Tools for Machine Learning in the Geosciences.
All right.
Whenever you're ready, Joe,
whenever you're ready, Joe.
I see. Okay, well, I'm ready. So great, let's hit it. Well, hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about some of our recent machine learning development efforts within the Pangeo project. But before I do, I thought it'd be useful to kind of review why we're all here. And I'll start with a photo of the recent floods in Germany that have left hundreds dead and hundreds more missing. At the same time, where I live here in the Pacific Northwest, and really all across the West, we're experiencing early and extreme wildfire conditions fueled by drought, climate change, and decades of aggressive fire suppression. Well, here's hot take number one for my talk. Despite all the pain and destruction that COVID-19 brought in the past 2 years, I think there's a lesson about the important role of science in our society. I don't know if I'll ever forget seeing this figure showing the effective mRNA vaccine. As a graduate student at the University of Washington, I studied climate change and its impacts on the hydrologic cycle. Another thing I learned is that science isn't what it used to be, and we're not in a chemistry lab anymore. I doubt this will come as a surprise to most folks here at ESIP, but in many ways, computers have become the modern laboratory. Indeed, there you go. We're using computers today for everything from DNA sequencing, remote sensing, and modeling climate change. To drill down a bit further, because I'm sure I'm getting a few does from the audience, in many quarters of the science universe, the trend has been towards larger adoption of machine learning as a tool for modeling data and doing data synthesis. Despite the huge transformation in recent years in how research is done, there are a few holdouts from the way we used to do things. For example, a few slides ago, I showed a paper from Norman Phillips from 1956, and I'd argue it basically looks like all the papers we see in the literature today. I'd argue we're leaning too heavily on the paper as the primary medium for communicating research outcomes. A prime example of where things are failing is the reproducibility crisis, where most scientists today report being unable to reproduce at least one research study. So I think we need to rethink what we're using as our research systems and really start from scratch and think about what the tools are that we're using. I think a really important part of that is open science. And I think open science should play a central role in future research systems. We've all heard the saying that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think open science is how we do that. By open science, I mean open data, open source software, and open publishing. And I think that will make the work we do significantly more efficient and effective. Here's where I turn to introduce the Pangeo project, which is largely focused on the open data and open source software pieces of the puzzle. So the Pangeo project, which began in 2016, is an open source community promoting reproducible and scalable science, and it has pioneered a new approach to collaborative data analysis. One of the key innovations of the Pangeo project is what we call the Pangeo platform, basically a cloud computing system that allows users to connect to distributed computing and storage via a web browser, like a Jupyter Notebook. I believe that one of the ways that Pangeo has managed to find success is in its ability to assemble multiple open source projects, mostly from the open source scientific Python ecosystem. One of those projects is X-Ray. Designed around the NetCDF data model, X-Ray provides multidimensional arrays and data sets coupled with an advanced toolkit for data analysis, parallel processing, and I/O. It's become a really popular tool for many geoscientists. Lately, our focus has been on a new project we're calling Pangeo ML. Using support from NASA's Access program, we're working to improve the machine learning workflows of geoscientists using Pangeo tools like X-Ray. A common refrain many geoscientists is that machine learning is, or that most machine learning libraries are built for tabular data. And, but as many scientists are using tools like X-Ray, we're looking to improve the interactions between multidimensional data sets and the machine learning libraries that many of us use. So this is where Pangeo ML comes in, where we're focusing on improving the workflow cycle of machine learning in the geosciences. Let me end by saying that Pangeo is an awesome and welcoming community, and whether you're interested in open data or machine learning or cloud computing, we'd love to have you join the effort. All right, thank you.
So this is Dana Ostrenga, and I'll start off by asking a question.
Cool.
How are you? So I really liked how you're focusing on the pre-processing requirements that'll fill the gaps with using both the data analytics and deep learning libraries, and then kind of focusing on scoping that project just to keep it under control. I think other innovative projects would really benefit from your effort with kind of improving on these machine learning workflows. Is there a plan to work with some of the other funded projects through like Access or other proposals to kind of work on integrating your machine learning workflows?
Yeah, we've had a couple conversations with other groups that are working under the Access program, and it's something that over the next year or two, we're hoping to really see blossom. But I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially with groups that are developing one end of the machine learning pipeline. Maybe it's training data, or maybe it's a specific application, but that we hope we can slot in and be a resource there.
And then working with, Pangeo, you work with a lot of different data. Is there, as you're finding a better best practice that you're kind of formulating, that you'd like to see data providers improve upon as you're creating these workflows or this machine learning tagging?
Yes, absolutely. Better best practices are always good. No, but I think, a lot of what we're finding is that analysis ready data, whether that's in the form of cloud optimized data formats or pre-processed training data sets, are kind of a foundational part for a really efficient machine learning workflow. So the more we can take the kind of data munging part out of the workflow and making that more efficient, the easier our job is.
Great. Leslie, how are we on time? Do we have time for any others on the panel to provide feedback to Joe?
I think we could have a quick comment in less than a minute, and after that, we should move on.
All right, Tracy or Katie, any feedback for Joe on his presentation?
I think Joe is doing great work, so I can't wait to find out what happens next with his organization. So yeah, good job.
Thanks, Katie.
Tracy, anything from you, or Dana, any last comments? All right.
I think it's great.
Great. Well, thanks, Joe. Sarah?
Thanks, Joe, for telling us about the future of Pangeo and open science. Our next speaker is Ben Letcher. Ben is a research ecologist within the USGS Eastern Ecological Research Center. His talk title is "Small Streams Are Important but Understudied. Can we use images and deep learning to estimate stream flow?" So Ben, you can start whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Small streams are important habitat for lots of plants and animals, and stream flow is one of the most important environmental drivers in streams, but we don't have a good way of measuring flow in small streams. I want to show you a new approach we've been working on recently. Understanding flow in small streams is important because most river length is in small streams that you can literally jump across. Here we are adding smaller streams to the map, and you can see there are lots of small streams, lots of habitat for animals and plants. Small streams are very important for the ecological benefits they provide. They are also habitat for many species that people care about, including cold water species like trout, where some small streams can provide refuge from warming water temperatures and floods. Let's look at how many small streams are in the US. There are millions. This makes sense because they're small, but as you can see, we don't often measure flow in the smaller streams. Even though there are many more small streams, measurements are skewed towards the larger rivers. How can we get data where the small streams are? Can we come up with technology that would get us good estimates of flow in small streams and be scalable so that in addition to the information from existing USGS flow gauges, we could also learn about flow in small streams in the US. While there are many good reasons to measure flow in small streams, this video shows what my research group and I have been working on for two decades, trout in small streams. We want to understand which streams will continue to support trout in the future as the climate changes. What we know is that more stream flow means more food and bigger fish, but too much flow when fish are small is bad for young fish and droughts are bad for adults. We also know that trout cannot tolerate warm water temperatures. This means that trout are likely to suffer a climate squeeze in the future with more variable flows upstream and warmer water temperatures downstream. So if we want to know which streams will still be habitable, it is critical to measure flow in different streams. Remote sensing, additional standard USGS gauges or models are possible approaches for a stream gauging system, but they each have issues. Here we are thinking about using images from time-lapse game cameras where we are interested in images of the stream instead of wildlife. And even though I didn't realize it at the time, I started thinking about this 5 years ago during daily dog walks with Ella. I had my phone with me, so I started taking pictures of the stream. I was also very excited about developing data viz tools, and I wanted to help people understand flow graphs. So I made a web app that linked the daily images to the graph. Some funders saw this and asked us to explore the exploding field of artificial intelligence for estimating flow from the images. Now we are thinking about what it would take to make an image-based system for stream gauging for small streams. To make this work, we'll need 3 key things: a database that's easy to use, the AI ML models, which relate flow to the images, and input data for the models, which can be flow estimates when available. So we've developed a database that makes it very easy to upload and view images. You can create a movie of the images by mousing over the data in the flow graph. The database will be available soon for general use, and we will encourage data uploads, and it will be linked to the models, which is the complicated part. We are basically using pairs of images to train the network to relate flow information to the images. The neural net smushes the images to find information that's related to the relative flow between pairs of images and provides a flow score. When we don't have flow data, which is most streams, we can get an adjustable index of relative flow for the site based on manual ranking of image pairs. When we do have flow data, the input data is flow itself, and the model score approximates flow. The exciting result is that we get a good relationship between our model score and known flow, a correlation of about 0.85. And we even get a similar result without flow data when the input data are based on the human annotated image comparisons. So now that we can predict flow from images, we're imagining lots of game cameras estimating flow in and across watersheds. These data would let us characterize flow variation among tributaries and identify which locations will be habitable for fish and other biota, especially as the climate continues to change. In addition to flow from the images, we could also estimate turbidity. We could understand seasonal change over time. We could learn about plant community change. We would also get information on floods and droughts, which could feed into early warning systems downstream. With game camera systems, a fraction of the cost of installation and maintenance of a typical USGS gauge, my dream is that we could have a high density, low cost gauge system across the US and other places that would complement the existing US gauge system, but extend it into small streams. I don't think Ella or I ever imagined our walks would turn into a possible stream gauging system, but our daily pictures led to funding for development of an image database and AI modeling. And now we plan to explore scaling the system up so we can learn which streams may still be habitable for trout and other animals in the future.
Wow, this was such a really fascinating talk. I am super excited. So I noted that you're doing work for USGS. Is there a citizen science aspect to this where you're engaging folks and how low cost can you get the camera network? So like one of those cameras, is it remotely connect? Like how is it even talking? So that's, I guess, 2 questions. How do you engage the scientists in this effort? And how do you get the data from these cameras that are placed around?
Yeah, so it started with my phone, and everybody has a phone in their pocket now. So you know, it's almost a no-brainer to build that kind of system. Right? Oh, super citizen scientist. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting sort of parallel cases where groups will have like a bracket where you put your phone, and then a QR code where you upload that image. So there's ways to make it really easy to get people to contribute images. So that's the citizen science part that could really work. The game cameras, there's lots of different ways you can do them. There are some that are connected to the web, so you could have automatic uploads, but those are more expensive. For like between $100 and $200 to $300, you can get the game cameras with SD cards. And so right now we just have people going out and downloading the SD cards, but it could be automated. And that's another interesting citizen science part, is literally having people just take care of the cards. Right now, that stream from those images is flooding like crazy. Our whole field is flooded, and everyone cares, and everyone's paying attention. Germany too. It's a big deal. So this is like really fun.
I could see an adopt a highway or an adopt a stream sort of initiative, like scouting troops or volunteer groups. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love that. We've thought about that kind of thing for funding research when things were dire.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love how you.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love how you took a personal experience and really took your thought from one dimension of just looking at habitat in this stream, and then how it has so many other potential use cases as it grows and expands a little bit more. So I think that's great. So really innovative thinking.
I really enjoyed it. Ben, what's your next step once you go public? What do you want to do next?
So we have to figure out how to deal with the images as data within a federal agency. That's a super challenging step, but there's a bunch of people working on it.
Well, good luck. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Ben, for sharing your very cool image-based streamflow gauging system with us. Our next speaker is Agbeli Ameko. Agbeli is an associate scientist at Climate Change Explorers. His talk title is Filling Data Deserts with 3D Printed Weather Stations. So whenever you're ready, Ag.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm ready. Yes, what you see here is a picture of sort of a global map of weather station density. The areas that are dark are basically data deserts where you don't have personal weather stations filling and collecting data. And as you can see, the poles and developing countries is where the data deserts are. Our project goals is to seek to fill the Earth's data deserts with reliable, cost-effective 3D printed weather stations, IoT sensors, and ocean floaters to grow a decentralized global climate data collection networks atop a new NFT, or non-fungible token, climate data token marketplace. So that's sort of the overall goal of our project, is to create this marketplace that fills data deserts. Our approach is to leverage the best ideas from IoT, 3D printing, communications, to make the stations very low cost and open source. And we really want to target the citizen science, research, and education space. This project was built off of the idea of 3D pause at NCAR that we've been working on at NCAR and IoTWX, and that is to have a low-cost 3D printed station. And when you compare 3D printed stations versus traditional stations, what you see is traditional stations are often much more costly. So for example, a professional grade station could cost up to $10,000, between $3,000 and $10,000. They're proprietary, and in other words, you can't really program them. Whereas the 3D printed stations are completely customizable. They're click and play soldering, and they are also completely open source. If you look at the Aero node, because we have each one you can have as a separate system, you have a sensor and you have a microcontroller that can allow you to collect pressure, temperature, relative humidity, and UV. So those are sort of the variables you can collect there. In rain, you can collect precipitation. You can also add soil moisture to this node as well. And again, you have a microcontroller and a sensor. And the microcontroller is something like $7, and the sensor is also a very low cost sensor. Again, you have digital wind speed and wind direction sensors, and this is controlled also by its own microcontroller. Now, what we've done is we really focused on looking at the difference between, if you look at Florida versus some of the islands down here, you can't even see Cuba, for example, but you can see Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. The topography will have different data deserts, and will actually emphasize these data deserts when you try to model Puerto Rico. So our students, NCAR students, actually installed a station here, and the number of stations in Puerto Rico, and you can see there they install stations. We've also have stations installed at home, and the home stations there's 2 in Colorado, there's 1 in Florida, there's 1 in Puerto Rico, and a number of other stations deployed around, and you can see that they are customizable. Our ongoing challenge is power and communications. We're trying to power the system whereby we're not just throwing batteries at the problem, but rather coming up with a low-cost, long-lasting power solution. We're also testing whisper or ham radio communications so that we can also have long-lasting and low cost communications. Of course, cloudy and long winter periods is another big challenge because we want to have low cost power, but a power that can also last through the winter. So in summary, our stations are 100% customizable. They are open source, so they're completely open source. Both software and hardware are open source systems. And lastly, they require no soldering. Now, building towards a big vision, you could say we want to start, the next phase is to, with funding is ocean floaters, so that is little sensors in the oceans, is to build this blockchain or NFT marketplace, and also to extend stations out in expeditions. Next winter, I'll be actually going on an expedition to Greenland, and in that expedition, I'll be installing a station in Greenland. So we're trying to build tougher stations. And then also, of course, we'd like the stations and ocean floaters to be deployed in the expeditions that are private expeditions, and not only private expeditions, but of course you have NSF and traditional expeditions. Lastly, I would like for you to visit our website, climatechangeexplorers.org, if you want to learn more about the NFT marketplace, or the climate data token marketplace, and also about some of the expeditions that the stations and ocean floaters will be deployed on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It's very exciting. I think it's a great idea, particularly since the areas where we have data deserts are where we need to not have data deserts the most. So thank you for that. I was wondering what you were doing in terms of data collection. I mean, it's ESIP, that's always where our heads go, right? But how, I know you've started some of the green shoots of that, but how do you see the data collection evolving over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we're doing with the data collection, especially, is to create this climate data token, and that allows to build an incentive for a marketplace for people to create value. So of course, where there are data deserts are going to make the data become more valuable on the climate data marketplace. So if you're looking at sort of a blockchain or non-fungible tokens, this actually creates that sort of incentive to build value for data, and those data can then be tied to other assets such as land, such as farming, such as sort of the climate change economy, if you will. Great.
I have like a quick follow-on question. I was just curious if it sounds like you all are spreading sensors sort of in different climates. Is that the path forward, is to try different climates and then start concentrating as you go?
Yeah, one of the things we found that the data deserts, they're sort of focused at the poles, but they're also focused on countries that are emerging and are lower economy. So if you did an economic correlation, you would see that countries with less economic prosperity are going to have less density of climate stations. And of course, that is distributed across different climate zones.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask really quickly, do you have any other sessions to plug during this week that people could come and talk to you or hear you present at a deeper level? This 5 minutes is great, but
yeah, I'm not presenting in any other session, but I will be in some of the coffee breakouts and some of the other sessions, particularly the ones around 3D printing and data.
Cool. Thanks.
I just have a quick question. So you had mentioned that you're going on this expedition and you're going to be installing a weather station. Is your hope going in the future that this will be expanded, as we mentioned in the previous talk about getting more citizen science involved, having more people invest in these ad hoc weather stations that they could add to fill those data gaps?
Exactly. A lot of expeditions are typically, NSF scientists on icebreakers. However, there are many different citizens who are doing, mountaineering expeditions and sailing charters or expeditions, as well as polar expeditions. So, of course, citizen scientists can bring a 3D printed weather station with them, and instead of just doing an expedition and taking selfies, they can actually take pictures and develop understanding of climate change.
Thanks, Ag. I really enjoyed hearing about your project and your future plans. Our next speaker is Aparna Bamzai-Dodson, and Aparna is the Deputy Director of the USGS North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. Her talk title is the Climate Futures Toolbox, an open source R package to support adaptation planning. So Aparna, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you. Imagine you're the resource chief at Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota. You're responsible for the sustainable management of forests and prairie grasslands, cave formations, endangered wildlife, charismatic wildlife, and visitor services. You regularly have to work on plans that cover everything from infrastructure to invasive species. And in the process, you have to balance the various needs of each individual resource, your funding constraints, and the input of 21 tribal governments. Now you have to consider the impacts of a changing climate on top of everything. Global climate models weren't part of your coursework 20 years ago, and honestly, you simply don't have time to learn about them now. Working with climate model data can be difficult, with multiple pain points across discovery, access, and usage. There are various data repositories, spatiotemporal resolutions, variables, file formats, and data limitations to consider. Climate projections also have substantial uncertainties associated with them. In the face of such uncertainty, managers can use scenario planning as a process for framing the issues and considering the range of possible outcomes. Resource managers and scientists identify a small set, usually 3 to 5, of multiple plausible divergent climate futures by examining data for their region of interest and variables relevant to the resources that they manage. Here's an example of how climate futures are selected. Changes in mean daily temperature and precipitation are plotted together, and selected futures could encompass hot and dry, feast and famine, and warm and wet conditions. Summary statistics and narrative information based on specific resource concerns can then be generated for each climate future to illustrate the range of risk exposure that managers should consider in their planning processes. Managers and scientists can use this information in their discussions to understand the impacts of climate change, identify and evaluate potential management responses, and select appropriate and robust adaptation strategies. With the support of the USGS Community for Data Integration, we developed the Climate Futures Toolbox, or CFT, a prototype R package for working with climate model data and generating summary information and customizable graphics. We were committed from the start to creating an open source and open workflow tool and to engaging management partners directly in the tool design to be responsive as user needs evolve and new data becomes available. By building an adaptive framework for data sources, making code open and accessible, and reducing the amount of custom code necessary, the project team hopes to lower the barrier to entry for working directly with climate projection data. The prototype package currently has a start to finish workflow using downscaled MACA version 2 climate data, but it is designed in a modular fashion that allows for new data sources to be added in the future. This enables subsequent tidy climate data analysis, including generation of derived climate variables and data visualizations. As part of the package guidance, we have built out a real-world vignette for Wind Cave National Park. This vignette shows you how to acquire and subset climate data for a specific region of interest using a shapefile, visualize the data that you've acquired, and generate and analyze derived climate variables, for example, the first day of frost. These data visualizations and summaries can be used to identify plausible divergent climate futures, which can then be used to generate lists of issues, stressors, and threats for priority resources within the park unit. By removing the pain points associated with accessing and summarizing the climate data, the Climate Futures Toolbox allows managers to focus their time and energy on planning for and adapting to climate change. Our next steps are to continue working with our CU Boulder Earth Lab colleagues to explore the potential for online training materials, dynamic analytics dashboards, and other features that would help our stakeholders plan for our changing world. We're excited to expand our user base and gather feedback on any existing issues or new features for implementation. we really encourage folks to install and use a package and start engaging with the code. Thank you all for your attention, to our management partners for their input during the prototype development process, and to the community for data integration for the seed funding necessary to create the prototype. Hopefully you all install it.
That was really cool talk, Aparna. I have a question about, so I see that you're using the Maca model now. So is that how often is it refreshed? And I know that you said that there's a modular framework for engaging new models. Have you actually thought about where your next steps would be as far as models and how you keep those up to date?
Yeah, so global climate model data is created sort of in parallel with the IPCC process. So when they're working on a new IPCC synthesis report, there's a whole global community that decides the timeline for creating the new projection data sets. So they don't get updated like every year. It's more on like a 5 to 10 year time scale that a new set of projection data will be released. And right now, they're starting on the next round of those models, and that data will be available in the next few years. So we really tried to design this prototype for the toolbox to allow us to update for that next generation of projection data. And there are multiple climate models and multiple then downscaling methods. So we picked one to, like I said, have a start to finish workflow. And now we're thinking about how to best expand it.
Yeah, do you know which model you'd be looking at next? I mean, maybe I'm just thinking in the context of this group would probably have contacts that you could reach out to or whatever.
Yeah, we haven't decided on that. The options could be either to expand outwards to multiple models or to expand the suite of variables that we have available right now. And so like, I know that there are a number of our partners who are interested in things like projected stream flow. And so do we want to add that as opposed to adding more variations on temperature and precipitation? So still trying to do our investigation of what would be most helpful to the community at large. And so respond to the poll that Leslie dropped into the chat and let us know what we can do to help you.
Cool, thank you.
Dana or Tracy, any comment or feedback for Aparna?
Nothing specific. I just really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Aparna, for telling us about your very cool and timely Climate Futures Toolbox. Our next speaker is Alemohammad. Hamad is the Chief Data Scientist and Executive Director at the Radiant Earth Foundation. His talk title is Advancing an Open Access Repository for Earth Observation Training Data and Machine Learning Models. So Hamad, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Machine learning is revolutionizing how we work with geospatial data and what we can derive from them. From models that predict wind speeds of hurricanes to the ones that estimate vegetation dryness as an indicator of wildfire fuel, machine learning is changing our paradigm of research. These models can work at different spatial scales. You can detect slums from high-resolution imagery in Manila, or you can work to detect trends of surface area reduction of Lake Urumia in the Middle East using Landsat imagery over 30 years of historical data. In machine learning, data, or specifically training data, is a key piece of the puzzle. It's basically the building block of developing a new model, and access to that is essential for reproducing and reusing that model. Training data can have different forms and formats depending on the problem you're working on. This is, for example, a set of agricultural field boundaries collected from ground data, or annotations of land cover, both of them co-located with satellite imagery. These pairs can be used to build models. And it's well understood that scientific discovery is a process, and every researcher builds on the findings and outcomes of a previous study. This underscores the importance of publishing and sharing results and data in an openly and fully accessible format. But we all have been there. As a researcher, you have probably received one of these emails asking for your data that you said it's available upon request. And then you start looking for that zipped folder where you have all the data, whether it's on your PC and the server, maybe a former student's laptop. And after you unzip that golden folder, you see all these file names, a very kind of informative filing format that we all have done at some point. And I like actually that number 2 at the end of these file names. But we can do better. This process can be much easier and more efficient, and we should do this. With increasing use of these data-driven and ML techniques, it's even more important to think about how we are going to publish and share models and data. And no one enjoys having bugs in their data or in their code. Fair data principles are a set of principles established for data publication. They are to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So data should be easily discovered and not sitting behind an email firewall. To address these requirements, we have established Radian ML Hub, which is the first cloud-based open access repository for geospatial training data. ML Hub is a hub for you to publish your data openly or access models and data from other researchers. It's basically an interoperable and cloud agnostic ecosystem. It has a federated data storage, standard data catalogs and API, and also multiple access points like a Python client, an API, and a web portal for accessing the data. Every data set has a DOI, citation, full documentation, and contact information, along with tutorials and publications for using the data. And more importantly, the data is stored in a cloud native and ML-ready format. So users can easily start ingesting the data. Currently, we host about 24 data sets with various applications from land cover and crop type mapping to building and infrastructure mapping, and also natural disasters and flood detection. And all of these are published and curated by members of the community. ML Hub is built on an open standard called Spatiotemporal Asset Catalog, or STAC, which is a community-defined standard that Radian convened the community for the last couple of years to develop. And it's helping every user, every data provider, and developer. ML Hub is for you and anyone who is interested to use geospatial data and apply machine learning to them. They can benefit from accessing high quality and trusted open data for their analysis, or publish their own training data for others to access and use. Currently, we have users all around the world and aiming to reach out to even broader communities globally. Particularly, our goal is to support publication of data from developing regions to fill the gap in the geographical diversity of ML-ready training data sets. Going beyond data and looking at the iterative process of building machine learning applications, it's also essential to design a framework for publishing machine learning models. So after you have trained a model and it is working in an application, being able to catalog and share that with the community. Therefore, our next step is to build a model repository for geospatial problems. Each entry will basically be a set of metadata that enables search and discovery of those models based on their problem domain, geographical applicability, or temporal applicability. And the models will be containerized so users can easily apply them. So next time you receive an email about your data or model, you can refer them to a registry page on ML Hub, and they can easily access your data or the model. The vision for ML Hub is to have federated and interoperable repositories of data and models globally that would meet the needs of geospatial ML problems and facilitate an open access portal for anyone to publish their data and model or to use them in their project for future. Thank you.
Great talk. I love how you're bringing all the data together into like a singular repository. So I just have some questions. You had talked a little bit about the user community you're kind of targeting. What kind of insights would you love to see out of this training data? And then as you try to incorporate more training data into the system, do you have ways to teach people how to better structure their data so that it follows those FAIR principles?
Yes, it has been also an evolving process for ourselves because, as you said, we have multiple types of data. Even thinking about data formats, it's quite different. So far we have done all of that actually internally. So we sit down with data providers, we do that for them, And through that, we are now learning and publishing best practices and guidelines how to do that in future. And we are aiming to make that process at least semi-automated, if not automated for future. So users and data providers and researchers can easily go through that themselves and basically push their data to ML Hub rather than going through us.
That's great. I think it'll really help produce more interoperable data. So will you eventually publish your kind of best practices or your findings and then possibly try to help incorporate into some of the current standards out there? Or what's your goal?
Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, great.
No, absolutely. We have done that with some of the ground data collections. For example, if you're collecting field data for agricultural purposes, how to do that and how to make it a standard, that's actually available in our GitHub now as an open guideline. And we are going to gradually do more of that with other kind of pieces of that puzzle and data publication.
We have time to keep going. Katie.
I have a quick question about, do you think much about potential ethical concerns of ML results that, and can you speak a little bit about how you are thinking about that with respect to, I guess, tribal lands or resolution imagery or things like that? I mean, what are the ethical concerns you kind of see in this space?
Very good question. So we have thought about it actually way before the ML analysis, which is the ML data. Even we are sharing labeled data, that there can be privacy concerns there. So we have some regulations and privacy policy internally, for example, not sharing any personally identifiable information in our data. So whether it's demographic data, individuals data, income, or any other those, we don't publish any of those. And the data is really data that is already labeled as being open access. So we have started with that level of thing, but now we are working with two other foundations in the ecosystem that are particularly working across the agriculture landscape that deals a lot with farmers and individuals to see, okay, what are the privacy concerns there? Who owns the data? And we actually have now a data privacy intern in our team working with that to look at those frameworks and come up with recommendations, working with the community, because we are not experts there either. And we recently joined the Locust Charter, which is an initiative of responsible use of location data. So we are going to follow those kind of community practices and contribute as much as we can to get to a point to do that. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Great. Any quick comments, Tracy?
No, Katie asked such a good question.
All right, great. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hamid, for telling us about ML Hub. Our next speaker is Na Chung. Na is a scientific applications software engineer at NASA JPL. Her top title is Cloud-Based Data Matchup Service. So Na, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. We can't talk about Earth science without talking about data. There's remote sensing data collected from satellites that measures anything from sea surface temperature to aerosol optical depth. And the volume of data from new missions continue to grow exponentially. Then there is in situ data collected from buoys, ships, drones, aircraft, as well as other platforms that measure similar Earth observing parameters. We have measurements collected all the way back to the 1800s. So that's great that we have a lot of disparate data. The challenge, though, is in co-locating satellite data with in situ data, or satellite data to satellite data for calibration validation, CalVal, mission data processing, and an endless number of science use cases. For example, we want to co-locate level 2 satellite wind with SST observations to assess the impact of marine heat waves on wind speed to determine if low wind speeds are more likely to occur with higher SSTs. In a different use case, to support mission CalVal, the science team needs to undertake global matchup comparisons between satellite salinity measurements and the designated in situ ground truth values. Another example is during mission data processing, the science data system augments salinity measurements from level 2 swaths with values from ancillary data sets, such as level 4 SST. The need for co-locating data isn't anything new, and the science community has developed lots of ways to accomplish this, from one-off scripts to deploying an entire matchup system. But the question is, are these existing methods customizable, reusable, and scalable?
Let's say you ran the matchup operation with a 10-minute tolerance window, but now you want to change it to 5 minutes and rerun. The system should allow this, as opposed to a matchup system that is configured with a predetermined set of tolerances that cannot be changed on demand. Each time a new mission gets funded, we see calls for CalVal activities that involve the need to co-locate data. We don't want to build and maintain a custom matchup system for each mission, so reusability is important. From the example use cases, it's clear the matchup system we are building needs to be scalable to support operations ranging from a single-day matchup to co-location for an entire satellite mission. With most data systems moving to the cloud-based data matchup service, also known as CDMS, aims to make it possible to perform data matchup at scale by leveraging cloud-native technologies. CDMS is currently under active development under NASA Access. Our focus is mapping to existing standards so that disparate datasets can be interoperable. This allows, for example, a parameter such as sea surface temperature to be mapped consistently across all systems and ensures that standard units are used. To leverage the scalability of the cloud, satellite data is broken into tiles and stored as a cloud-optimized format. Metadata for each tile is indexed to enable a high-performance spatial temporal lookup. In situ data is stored as Apache Parquet format in cloud object storage, and we use Spark SQL to run distributed queries on the in situ data. Now that we know how data is optimally stored, we can distribute the matchup operation by querying for satellite tiles that matches the search domain and partitioning this list of tiles so that we can, in parallel, query for matchup datasets. The matchup request and all supporting functions, such as data subsetting, downloading matchup output, is exposed via APIs, so you can write your own Jupyter notebook. And then the possibilities of how you want to visualize your matchup results are endless. CDMS also provides a web portal graphical user interface for you to browse and to submit matchup requests interactively, enabling you to customize matchup tolerances as you see fit. CDMS supports both NetCDF4 and CSV output formats and implements a consistent set of relevant CS attributes, but also specific metadata to document query parameters and provide linkage back to the original source data. The CDMS software stack is available through Apache SDAP, so it is fully open source, and we welcome contributions from the community. What started out as a JPL project now has contributions from engineers at EFMR. Our plan is to deploy CDMS nodes at JPL, FSU, NCAR, and Celdrone. Our ultimate end goal is to have CDMS infused across all Earth science data systems, from the NASA DAX to NOAA to European Data Archives, so that we can match data from anywhere. I want to end by saying we have a poster on Wednesday if you're interested in learning more about CDMS. Thank you.
Thanks for the great presentation. I think, as you had mentioned even yourself, it's been a high desire to do this collocation between in situ and satellite data for quite a period of time. And a lot of researchers have come up with some methodologies to do that. Have you found, since you've already developed this service and you're trying to improve it, make it more scalable and cloud, integrate it into the cloud framework, have you found any major gaps that still need to be addressed to do that collocation a little bit easier and create easier matchups between the data?
I think that the challenge which we mentioned is mostly standards. So we found, with our background in oceanography, that even just one mission like SPURS, the range, number of variables and how disparate they are, runs into the number of hundreds of those different variables. So we're trying to address that by mapping to existing standards where appropriate. And this doesn't apply just to oceanography, but it could be applied to other areas as well, I'm sure.
You have time for other questions or comments from the panel?
Where do you see your next steps, your sort of immediate next steps, and then maybe a little bit further down the line, medium term?
So we're in access funded, so we still have, I think, 2.5 years. We just started. Immediate next steps definitely is improving the software and also focusing on infusion. So we have a close relationship with PODAC, but engaging PODAC early on, I think that's a lot of the feedbacks that we've received. It will help, I'm sure.
Any other comments?
No question, just great work now.
Go ahead, Dana.
Quick question. So as this project evolves and the service evolves, do you think of incorporating some of these other capabilities to improve the matchups? You said that the users kind of do the matchups themselves, but are you somehow capturing this information to maybe feed into machine learning algorithms or kind of be more suggestive in the matchups for the user?
Great question. Yes. So one of our goals for the project is actually to be able to sort of mine what the users are matching up on to further better provide search or learn from what users are matching up on. So yes.
Thank you so much, panel.
Thank you very much, Na. That was a very informative presentation about your matchup system. Our last speaker this morning is Kathy Todd Brown. Kathy's an assistant professor with the Department of Environmental Engineering Sciences at the University of Florida. Her talk title is Falling Down Mount Stupid.
Thank you.
So, Kathy, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. So we heard a lot of really great talks this hour about specific projects. And I'm going to blow out a little bit and talk about sort of my personal journey on this confidence to knowledge skills axis, where I feel like I'm currently falling down Mount Stupid and trying to claw myself out of the valley of despair. So this is motivated by my interest in global climate change. I think a lot of us share, and specifically thinking about the carbon cycle in the global climate change context. So if you look at the numbers here between the soil carbon stock, which is about 15 to 24,000, and the petagrams of carbon, and the atmospheric carbon stock, which is about 860 petagrams of carbon, soils play this key role in the global carbon cycle. And if we want to try to mitigate or manage atmospheric carbon, soils are a really appealing option. To develop these strategies, we need models. So I came at this field through a modeling and mathematics lens. And as I was developing my models, I needed data. Fortunately, soil science is as old as dirt, and we have lots of data. Researchers have been measuring and looking at soils, especially in agricultural context, for a very long time. So this is a data-rich field. So in 2017, as a young postdoc, somebody presented this to me as a data aggregation problem. And coming at this from a mathematics and programming standpoint, I know how to merge data, and merging data is easy. Of course, merging data is not easy. Let's just take, for example, the bulk density. So this is an example of some tables that are in a couple of USGS bulletin reports. And if we think about just bulk density, it's simple mass to volume ratio, right? Well, it's reported as both as different names and sometimes as different measurements. So for example, bulk density can refer to as fine earth bulk density or whole earth bulk density, and those two are not directly comparable. So 5 years later, I am working my way through the valley of despair. I have fallen off of Mount Stupid, and we're trying to figure out how we can tackle this sort of project of data harmonization in a more intelligent way. So the first step is to look around, see how other people have done it. Majority of projects use the grad student method, I like to call it. You stick a grad student in a room with a computer and a couple of data sets, and you say, don't leave until you have a single data set to rule them all. So you're having somebody manually integrate all of these data. Anyone who's done that sort of comes out of that experience thinking, well, if everyone just used a master data template, my job would be a whole hell of a lot easier. And of course, as we're flipping slides, templates are both too big and too small. So this is not quite the solution we were hoping for. So this is an example of sort of the evolution of a master data template through a number of research projects. And as the different focus of these research projects shift, the data templates shift and are no longer sufficient. So the big question here is, how do we co-produce maybe a more general semantic resource that's not quite the big data template to rule them all, but could be an intermediary connective tissue across all of these different data tables. And so of course, the first solution is to talk a lot. And so in 2020, last summer, I and a couple of co-conveners started the Soil Ontology and Informatics Cluster here at ESIP. We're meeting every other week and we talk a lot. The second part was to investigate the data landscape. And so we've got a white paper right now that you can contribute to, talking about sort of what does the current data landscape look like in this particular discipline. And right now we're in our prototype and iterate phase. So we've convened a working group that meets twice a week for 4 months. Out of 70 applications, we have a team of 10 soil scientists and informaticians, and we're currently on week 6 and everybody's still showing up. I'm really excited about that. So let's, what I'm hoping to get from your audience right now is sort of thinking about how can we move forward as a community to co-develop these semantic resources. And so thank you both to the ESIP cluster, specifically the International Soil Carbon Network, the ESIP support staff, and my own lab of undergraduates. Undergraduates are fantastic for sort of doing gut checks of, does this make sense? So with this, I would like you to crawl with me up the slope of enlightenment as a community to a more integrated and harmonized data landscape. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your talk. That was really interesting. I was curious. I had a couple questions, but first of all, I was curious. What surprised you the most when you were looking at sort of the current data set landscape?
Sort of the general lack. So there are a couple of ontologies and sort of semantic tools that are out there for soils, but they tend to not, I didn't feel like they were very grounded in data. So for example, the bulk density difference between fine earth and whole earth is sort of sieve size that you use for distinguishing the mass ratios there. And there was really no way to annotate that in the existing ontologies, or really a way that was flagged that was a critical step there. And also just the general lack of sort of machine readable vocabulary lists. So there were a lot of organizations that had developed these very detailed terminology and vocabulary lists that maybe were printed as, say, a PDF or just a list of terms on a website. So that really was insufficient from an informatics standpoint into integrating that into sort of data set annotations.
So what do you think your next sort of immediate step is?
So right now, the first working, I'm about to stand up the call for the second working group. The first working group, we've kind of thought a little bit more about bulk density. That's sort of an easy place to start mass to volume, relatively common measurement. And so we're building out sort of a little bit of a data model, a little bit of a basic ontology for that. Maybe I'll extend that out to another variable and then take those data models to an ontology like ENVO and say, okay, how do we start a soil specific ontology that would be relevant to these observations that are being made?
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I'm really interested in the answers to the poll question on this one. So get out there and fill it out.
Yeah, fill it out.
Yes, it's been really enjoyed your talk. It's been really interesting thinking about how to do this as a community activity. So developing an ontology or a vocabulary list is sort of a thankless task for any individual, and adoption of those ontologies and vocabulary lists is not something that you can really push forward as any one person. So you have to do this as this integrated community activity. And it's a really fascinating way to think about how do you this sort of interdisciplinary, it's an opportunity for interdisciplinary collaboration between informaticians and domain scientists. And there's all sorts of cool science that can come out of that.
Thank you so much, speakers and panel. I can't believe it, but we did it. And I'm going to turn it over to my session co-leads.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Sarah, do I get a thumbs up? All right. First, I'm Annie Burgess, everyone. Nice to meet all. Let's see, I think my last count was 213 folks here. I'm the lab director with the ESIP, and I would like to thank Sarah and Leslie. We've been working on this session weekly for several weeks now, and it's just been a total joy to work with these two. I'd also like to thank our panel, Dana, Katie, and Tracy, three I'd say female powerhouses in the world of earth science, and it's been a joy to have them as our panel, and thank you for providing such insightful feedback. I'm going to just do one pitch, and I just put the link in chat that our theme of innovation will run throughout the meeting. But one way that all of you can kind of scratch that innovation itch is to participate in Funding Friday, which is our own mini grant competition that we hold here at the ESIP summer meeting. So please do check out the link that I put in chat. This is your chance to take an idea that maybe was sparked through this session and to create a poster, hopefully with some of your peers, and you'll have the opportunity to pitch it on Friday morning. And you have the chance to win $5,000 if you are registered at the kind of member rate, or $3,000 as a student or teacher. So please do check that out. You'll probably hear more about Funding Friday throughout the week. I will also end by saying a huge thank you to all of our speakers. And let's see, I'm going to have everyone on the call. Let's see how many people we could do to unmute their mics and just give a round of applause to our 8 very brave speakers who took the challenge of 20 slides, 15 seconds, spotlighted cameras. Great job. All right, you can all mute now. So thanks, everyone. I will say, as Sarah said at the beginning, this is to help these projects with feedback from all of you so they can continue to improve and evolve, build connections to increase their likelihood of infusion wherever they possibly can end up. If you would like to connect with any of these projects, please do reach out to me at lab@esipfed.org. I will connect you to the appropriate person, whether it be the PI or the project lead or other person on the team. We would love to build these connections further. So again, thank you to our panelists, my co-conveners, and mostly to our speakers today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan Shingeldecker, who is going to kind of take us into break and fill you in on what we've got going for the rest of today in the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. What a great session. I loved seeing so many faces and hearing about such a wide range of incredibly innovative efforts. For those of you that are new to ESIP, I hope that this has given you just a snapshot of the talent and the passion, and perhaps my favorite, the sense of humor that is here in the ESIP community. I also love that this group is always up for a challenge and is not afraid to mix it up and try new things. Some of you have said it in chat, but a lot of behind the scenes work goes into making a session like this happen. So I really want to thank Sarah, Leslie, and Annie for dreaming this up and not being afraid to take a risk. So thank you to the 3 of you and all the speakers and the panelists. For those of you who want to continue discussions with our speakers, feel free to stay on Zoom after this session. And then before we send you off for a short break and some great breakout sessions this afternoon, there's a few other items on the agenda that I wanted to highlight for you. As Annie mentioned, Funding Friday is our grant competition. And it was our hope that this plenary has you thinking about creative ideas and who you would like to collaborate with. Please join us later today for our coffee break networking and our happy hour. These efforts will take place in Wonder, which is that spatial chat platform that allows you to move around a room and have small group conversations. And then lastly, the research showcase is open throughout the week. We have nearly 50 posters, and that is a lot to see. So We will have a special live event on Wednesday night, but you don't have to wait until Wednesday. You can view the posters at any time, leave feedback and questions in the Google Docs that are posted in each room. So for now, you can stay here and continue conversations with some of our presenters, or you can enjoy your break, and we will see you in the breakout sessions in about an hour at 1:30 Eastern.
Thanks, Susan. And for anyone, if you did have questions for our speakers, or if any of our speakers are still around, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we could all enjoy our break and see you back in session. So maybe we could hang out here for just a little bit if anyone wants to have a chat with our speakers. Well, I'll just say, I'm just going to start chatting and people can interrupt so there's not awkward silence when there's a bunch of people on here. Ag, I was going to ask with the Greenland expeditions, how you guys have been testing if you've been talking to any polar folks about how sensors and equipment are holding up at those temperatures and wind speeds that you might, well, I guess wind speeds you probably have an experience in Puerto Rico, but any kind of tips that you've gotten for how things will work in more extreme environments? Oh, you're muted. Oh, still can't hear you, Ag. How many switches? There we
I gotta
go.
get this button. Yeah, so we've been testing it up at the Mountain Research Station at Niwot Ridge, which is at around 13,000 feet. So, which also gets extremely windy and cold in the winter, and it has a very high variability. So that's sort of our test environment right now. So we're trying to dial that in, and particularly dial in the battery situation. Now, of course, just throwing batteries at the problem, batteries are actually heavy. So we're trying to go with a hybrid power. So we're using both wind and solar. And of course, in the winter, sunlight hours become an issue at that point as well. So we're going to hopefully rely on some wind power.
Awesome. And then Kathy, I was going to ask you if you have if you've talked to any of your other colleagues about this project and are just saying, it kind of doesn't matter if you care about soils. You just insert your field here. You have the same problem, maybe not with the data record that soils do, but if you've gotten to have another conversation with people in another kind of geosciences field to say, just use this, take this model that we've done, and you can use it with your own question, because it's really the model that we've found worked.
So what I was hoping to get out of ESIP when I first joined 1.5 years, 2 years ago, was to find communities that had already done this, because this certainly seems like a common problem across a lot of science, even beyond just Earth observations.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't really found any. And that's not to say that they don't exist, and it's not to say that they shouldn't exist, but I haven't run across them yet. So one of the things that I'm really enjoying about our working groups is just the diversity of expertise that you need to tackle this problem. Sort of thinking about how is data stored, some knowledge engineering, methodologies. So what does it look like to take a volume measurement of soil? That seems like it should be a pretty straightforward question, and it's not. So this concept that you have this really tight collaboration between the informaticians and domain scientists in a way that everybody can sort of buy in and own the process, is sort of a fascinating meta concept that I'm running down.
Well, and it's so common. I mean, normally it's in a machine learning talk that you see I think it was, maybe I first saw it and Rahul Ramachandran gave a talk with a slide that had the kind of Venn diagram of all the skills that you need and then like a unicorn was the center circle in terms of machine learning and expertise, informatics, math, domain. So I think saying, listen, since we all acknowledge the unicorn problem, that convening in this space of a place like ESIP, where you're just bringing everyone together and having those talks, that we're not trying to build everyone to have those skills, but saying the unicorn is really a space and a time that we can all come together and tackle the challenges as a group. So I think that sharing this model, I mean, it really is like, it makes our job easier because you just justified like, oh yeah, we exist because we can provide this, but that it's really great to kind of apply it all over. And certainly in the machine learning world where that is, you know, no one has all of the skills, and if they do, they're making more money than an earth scientist makes. So
yes.
Does anyone else that has kind of stuck on the line have any questions for any folks? If not, it's now officially the end of our session, so we can end things, but I'll stop talking for a little bit if anyone wanted to pipe up.
So Ryan dropped a question in the chat. What most important roles are often not included in the semantic tech co-development teams? And that's a great question. We are in the first prototype team at this point. So we haven't quite gone through our first evaluation from the working group output. So talk to me in a year and I'll try to get back to you on that one.
Thanks, Kathy, for that response. And Ag, you had a whole bunch of questions asked to you right after your talk. So you might want to, you can look at chat and I'll copy and paste them so they don't go away, because I'm going to end this session now and we will have a record of chat. And so I can make sure that you have those questions to follow up if you'd like. So with that, I'll say thank you to everyone. I look forward to seeing everyone in the sessions this afternoon and at the coffee break and tonight's happy hour. So bye, everyone. Thanks so much.